The fight for the unborn goes far beyond today's March for Life. People all over the world are committed to defeating abortion and fighting against the culture of death.
That's right, Catherine. I recently sat down with Calum Miller, a pro-life doctor and philosopher in the United Kingdom, to discuss the fight for life across the globe. We started with big news from a small country in Europe. There are so many other pro-life stories, and I hear you've been following one in Andorra, the country between France and Spain that attempts to legalize abortion even though one of its highest-ranking officials is a bishop. Can you share the latest in that situation?
Yeah, Andorra is a very special place because it's the sort of heads of state are two co-princes. So one of those is the Catholic Bishop of Andorra. The other is the French president, Emmanuel Macron. And those obviously have very different value systems. So you can imagine that they might disagree on a few things when it comes to bioethics and abortion and things like that. There's a very strange situation at the moment, and we have to be a bit careful about what we say because I'm sure it's politically sensitive. The government of Andorra is trying to decriminalize abortion. So at the moment, Andorra is one of the only countries in Europe that still protects unborn children and women and families from abortion. But the government is really determined to change that, to remove all the penalties for abortion, to allow it to be done, to have it funded, and so on. And they claim, and the Vatican has been very quiet about this, but the government is claiming that they have been in talks with the Vatican about this decriminalization process, and the government has even been indicating that they are quite close to an agreement. Now, this would be very troubling because any agreement would be a step towards death and towards abortion. And it's very likely that any change from the current law would be something that Catholics and Christians should never agree to. But the government is sort of suggesting that they are reaching this agreement with the Vatican. Now, they originally claimed that they would have an agreement by the end of 2025, and now they've backpedaled a bit and said we're actually not as close as we thought. It's quite possible that they are trying to force the church's hand by pretending there's an agreement and sort of encouraging the church to just go along with it. So the honest answer is we don't really know what is going on. We do know that Vatican officials, very senior officials, including Cardinal Parolin, have met with the Andorran government. We don't know the contents of those discussions. We don't know how much of that was on abortion. But at least the government's narrative is that they are working towards a deal. We hope that's not true, but it's something that certainly we should be aware of, because any deal would likely be a significant move away from the pro-life culture and laws that they currently have.
And this that you mentioned, them trying to use that as a way to kind of force the hand of the Vatican, has this been used in other cases in other countries around the world?
It's a good question. Not to my knowledge, but politicians are politicians. They will often try sneaky tricks, and we know that one of the Vatican's fundamental diplomatic policies is discretion and being fairly quiet and being very cautious and careful about how they negotiate in these political issues, especially when it comes to the politics of a sovereign nation. Andorra is obviously a special case because it's got the bishop as the co-prince. So it's a very easy thing to exploit the Vatican's silence and discretion, because you can kind of claim anything about them knowing that they're quite unlikely to give any comment denying it or affirming it. So I think that's what the Andorran government has used, and that's partly why we're in a difficult position, because we don't know what the real truth is.
Shifting a little bit back to your own native United Kingdom, we heard the troubling news that a pro-life woman has been arrested for violating the national buffer zone law. What can you tell us about this?
Yeah, so many people will have seen these cases where people have been arrested for praying silently in their heads in the UK. There was one woman who was arrested for holding a sign saying, "Here to talk, only if you want." Just simply offering a consensual conversation silently and doing nothing else. She was arrested as well. Most of these arrests have been under local laws from the cities themselves that said no antisocial behavior in these zones. But in the last few months, the UK finally passed a national buffer zone that covers the whole country. And this is the first arrest under that national law. And so it is a significant moment that moves even more towards this kind of authoritarian regime that we've been seeing many people complain about all over the world.
And now I know you've also been following stories in Costa Rica and the Dominican Republic. What news do you have to share from there?
Yeah, the news generally over the last year in the pro-life space has been relatively good globally. Obviously, there have been difficult things we've spoken about, but around the world, in the last year, no countries have legalized abortion, which is pretty unprecedented. Costa Rica had a situation where they had put out some guidance that reinterpreted the law and sort of encouraged doctors to do abortions. And this, of course, caused significant problems in a country that is generally very Christian and pro-life. Now, the pro-life groups there complained to the government about this. They raised a lot of concerns, and it wasn't clear where it was going to go, because the general sentiment I understand from friends in Central America is that Costa Rica has had one of the more liberal, progressive-leaning governments in the region over the last decade or so. Fortunately, in this case, the pressure worked. The government repealed those guidelines and put out some new guidelines, basically reaffirming the law that said, this is what the law says, you cannot do abortions, children must be protected, you can only intervene if the woman's life is genuinely at stake.